true, very creepy surveillance story. I discovered this subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family at the time. I didn't really talk about it back then as it scared the hell out of me. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia. The year was 2008. My dad had just got Foxtel, a cable TV service here in Australia. But only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box, and I really wanted to get the cable in my room without paying $99 for a new box. So one day, Dad went out and bought an AV transmitter/receiver. It was a two-piece bit of hardware where you would plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. My youngest sister was the only other person home at the time. She was upstairs in her room. Anyway, I opened the box and connected it up. At first, I was going back and forth, trying to get the channels right, etc., but no luck, until finally I got something. I remember just sitting there and something started fuzzing in, and this is where things start to feel like a horror movie. As it started fuzzing in, I remember that the cable box wasn't even on, so I wondered, why was I getting a signal? Then the picture fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. I freaked the hell out because my first thought is that it was my bed. I'd recently seen Saw 2 and remembered that scene where she turns on the TV and it's a camera filming her in her apartment. That was the first thing that I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was or how I was getting the signal, but obviously it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal. But we were just so confused as to who or what it was for. Eventually, my parents came home, and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor or someone living close by for us to be receiving the signal. We waited around until about 6 p.m. and then someone came into the room. My dad recognized it as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either this, or it was to tape themselves doing things. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room, but just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup on, staring at the camera, waving, and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. Although this never happened, what did happen was still insanely creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days the novelty kind of wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it, and just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating, until one day we turned it on and realized what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During weekdays they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening drawers. I called out to my mum and we started watching it. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them and doing all sorts of creepy things. At first we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing, he's being filmed. Will the neighbors see this somehow? But then what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the cameras and looked right down the lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mum immediately called Dad, but I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told Mum that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. Dad came home and by this time the plumber had left. Much to Mum's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what he saw. Mum wanted to completely stay out of it and was terrified, understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found that was holding the camera was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently and there were lots of water restrictions. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. Immediately, they called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends, but truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden in our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mum was speaking to the wife next door and asked what happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would at nights come to our street and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watch them on his laptop. When Mum told me this, I got the biggest shivers, as on multiple nights when I'd driven home late from my girlfriend or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never there during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just this creepy plumber sitting back there on a laptop watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true, and it still creeps me out to this day. To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in Australia, in that we don't have any. So long as you're respectful and non-destructive, you can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, so long as once you leave the area, you left it how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents' friends and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There were always yachts bobbing just off the shore, with people in them and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in the winter of 2010. I know you love dogs, and she'll be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little bit about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dog-fighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my best guess is a Lurcher/Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people and most dogs, but absolutely do not threaten her, she'll have you. So by the time of this camping trip, I'd had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but as far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad and my mum. I didn't mind, I wasn't that attached to the other kids. I'd rather play with my dog, and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up and the beach illuminated in campfires, but the beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of year, and I wanted her to have air. As we're fumbling about in the dark, on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big O shape if you felt like it. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, Mum's asking him had he seen that car drive around. It's been a few times. My dad kinda shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more minutes, a car pulled up next to ours on the road and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mum said it must be the security. I don't know why around a beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool, a junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. Although I was small at the time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. Don't really like my dad, but credit to him. Once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that it was fine, would leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad and possibly us as well once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put dad in a relationship with him above us. But this isn't how it went down. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator. She ran from behind us and leaped and got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife that had been in the arm she had got him by. He kicked her, he punched her and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Palmy over. She was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I'd left it. We think what happened was when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap I'd left for her. As it was an old car and had the rolly down windows and not an electric button, we think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. But this is not the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into a hotel for the night. My parents decided just to drive home so we could all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol as they were getting low. I spent the time trying to clean Parmesan up a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she'd just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out the window. My mum asked him what on earth he was doing, and I told her he was trying to see when it opens. My heart sank. Parked in the corner behind a van was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was remote. The next town over was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much petrol. We realized as we began driving, we were going to break down. That's fine, Dad said. We had AA cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least somewhere acceptable for the night, better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flashed from behind us. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so it wouldn't upset us. But we were really little kids. We were both double digits. We knew how dangerous this situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fume meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles. We were driving on fumes. I don't really believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. My sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home, just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mum phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was that guy or just a random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her. So what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet? Well, for me, it's that I love Parmesan.